Hello and welcome to Terra Talks. In today's episode, we will discuss how a Palm Beach County parent advocated for his daughter, who has dyslexia, sued the school district of Palm Beach County and won. My guest today is Dr. Daniel Kapp. He is the proud parent of 3 children, a native Floridian, and one of the top plastic surgeons in South Florida. He is going to share his family's journey with the school district of Palm Beach County and how it led to a life-changing lawsuit. However, here's my disclaimer. We have a lot of information to cover, so if we can't get through everything in this episode, I am definitely inviting Dr. Kapp back to continue this conversation. Let's talk. All right, so there's a family history of dyslexia. Because of this, you knew what signs to look for with your daughter. Tell me more about this.
So my father's dyslexic, and when I was in high school, my father was actually going to school at night learning how to read. After work, he would go to reading classes every night. So we knew that we had a family history of dyslexia. I also have a niece with dyslexia, a brother and a sister with dyslexia, and an older son with dyslexia. But we thought the third time was the charm for us. Our third kid would be great, and we asked the school district to be aware that our family history of dyslexia was very strong, and the first grade teacher gave us a wink and a nod, and she said, I have a daughter, my daughter's dyslexic, and I think Leah's having trouble with reading.
Okay. All right. So she's in first grade. Teacher says she's struggling with reading, specifically phonics. Teacher, she has someone in her family who has dyslexia, so she has some knowledge of this. What happens next?
So we took our daughter to the University of Miami. Now, we started tutoring right away because we had an older son with dyslexia, and he had a tutor. So we started tutoring her right away. So as soon as we found out, which was about April of her first grade year, we started tutoring. And then we took her to the University of Miami. It took a little time to get that appointment.
Right.
The appointments with psychologists take a long time because the testing is extensive. So, and we took her down there. They did a full day's worth of testing. And by the start of the second grade school year, we got the report. And the report said that she was dyslexic. And they gave us a number of detailed recommendations. And we brought that right to the school, right to the principal, actually, before the school started.
Okay. So she was privately evaluated, diagnosed with ADHD and dyslexia. You shared the evaluation with the school, but from my understanding, they gave her a 504 plan and it only had ADHD on it. Nothing about the dyslexia.
That's right. So they gave her a 504 plan, and they put attention deficit disorder on the 504 plan, but they refused to actually put the word dyslexia on the 504 plan, even though it was a medical diagnosis from a psychologist at the University of Miami, which we thought, if we bring her to the University of Miami, the diagnosis will be undisputable because she's a professor.
Right.
So they didn't look at it like that, and they decided that all of her problems were related to her behavior, and that was not going to be a reading problem.
Amazing. Okay. So fast forward, December 2019. The school has a meeting to discuss academic progress. You aren't there. Your wife isn't there. What happened?
No. So in the December 2019 meeting, I was there.
Okay.
I was there.
All right.
And they just disregarded the fact that she had a reading problem.
Mm-hmm.
They said, daughter doesn't have a reading problem. And actually, what happened was, in October of 2019, my wife had met with the school.
Okay.
And they said to my wife, there is no reading problem. Mom, you're not working hard enough with her at home on her B's and D's, and you need to be doing this at home because you're not reading to her. So she's not able to comprehend because you're not reading story and you're not asking her probing questions.
Oh.
My wife's a doctor, by the way.
Right.
And she actually has read to my daughter every night since she was a little girl, and they've read every volume of Harry Potter together. My wife would read that to her every night. So
yeah.
we knew that they were just giving us a bill of goods.
Okay. Tell me about Child Find.
So Child Find is a responsibility that the federal government places on the school district to identify every child in the school district with a disability. And it actually requires them to seek and find. It's actually a mandate that says you have to go and look for them. And it requires them to not just look at 2-year-olds, not just look at 3-year-olds, but look at children anywhere along the continuum of their education in the public school system to see if they have a disability.
Right.
And it actually includes public and or private schools. And in going through the process, we discovered child find takes place in Palm Beach County, but it only really takes place in that pre-kindergarten, right, age group with children that are profoundly disabled. So that it does not expand to kids with reading disorders or specific learning disabilities in math. That's not done. It's really, the county only focuses on kids with profound disabilities like profound autism or Down syndrome. So this type of screening that the district would need to do to identify these kids just doesn't take place.
Okay, I see. So eventually she was placed in RTI, right?
So eventually she was placed in RTI. But when they placed her in RTI, by the time they had even gotten to the point of placing her in RTI, we had already had over a year of tutoring for her dyslexia.
Right.
And the problem is that the RTI methodology they use is not a methodology used or a reading tool for children with dyslexia. So she was already identified with dyslexia.
Right.
And then they were going to use an RTI program to remediate her, catch her up to speed. And yet the evidence shows that the method that they were going to use would never be able to accomplish what she needed because it was the wrong program.
Exactly. So typically they use LLI, right?
Correct.
Level Literacy Intervention. It's not intended for students with disabilities at all. Years ago, they interviewed the authors of LLI, Fontes and Pinellas, and asked them this question, and they specifically said it was not designed for students with disabilities. Still and yet, they use this with your daughter.
That's true. In fact, in the process of this whole series of events that took place, I actually emailed Irene Fontes, and I asked her, I said, my daughter's dyslexic and they're using LLI for her RTI. Is that the proper methodology to be using for her RTI? And her answer was, no, it's not for dyslexia.
Wow. Okay. So I also noticed that in the final order, teacher after teacher continuously communicated, your daughter is struggling with this, she's struggling with decoding, she has reversal, she's doing this, that, and the other. And when I read that, I sort of felt like the parents know this. The parents, they communicated with the school that their daughter has dyslexia, but still and yet the teachers are giving you all of this information like it's new knowledge. Now, I'm not sure if they saw the evaluation. I know sometimes at schools the communication from the top to the bottom isn't great, but what were your thoughts around that?
The teachers did a great job.
Okay.
They did not have the skill set and the tools to be able to teach her how to read.
Okay.
And it was not because they didn't want to. The teachers were very frustrated.
Okay.
And it was a challenge for them. Leah's really bright, so she was in gifted classes too.
Right.
Right. So, but we heard, I've never had a child with dyslexia before. And it's probably true they never had a child with dyslexia because they probably never had a child that was diagnosed with dyslexia before.
Exactly.
Not that they hadn't had a child with dyslexia, but they hadn't had one with the diagnosis.
Exactly.
And that was really the challenge, was to help the teachers. But what I found was the administration of the school was not empowering the teachers to be able to help our daughter.
Okay.
So it's more of a systemic problem. It's not a teacher problem.
No.
Right? The teacher will teach the pathway that they're told that they're permitted to teach, right? And there's a lot of structure in what they're allowed to do. So they weren't allowed to deviate from how they were teaching her.
Exactly. So, even in this case, if someone shared the evaluation and gave them best practices and these are the methods you should use, that would have been ideal. But that didn't happen because it's a one-size-fits-all approach in the school district.
That's right. That's right. And I think if you look at the approach, most kids who learn to read will learn to read with whatever you give them to learn to read.
Right.
Because they don't have dyslexia. But then when you have kids who are dyslexic, they're only going to learn to read if they have that structured literacy with the phonics and the mnemonics and that whole structure of the word and language brought to them.
Right.
And it has to be discrete. The truth is, kids who are going to learn how to read can learn how to read that way too. So it's not, if you learn with structured literacy, that you're not going to learn how to read.
Right.
If you learn with a whole word literacy, right? So it is a better way to teach because it's more inclusive of students with all sorts of reading problems.
I completely agree. And I think what I'm seeing now is that now there's a big push nationwide for the science of reading, which is based off of phonics, right? What all kids need. However, when you think about how the districts are training teachers to do this, it's not good training. So even though we have schools and teachers that can say, oh, our curriculum includes the science of reading, they still don't know how to teach phonics. As a former administrator, I've gone into classrooms and I've seen teachers, primarily new teachers, when teaching students letter sounds, instead of saying k, they're saying k, and they're putting a schwa sound on the end because the training isn't there. These teachers are not trained to properly provide instruction to students who have reading difficulties, be it dyslexia or any other reading difficulty. Going forward, let's talk about Dr. Siegel. Tell me about him.
So Dr. Siegel's a her.
Her.
So, yeah,
Okay.
Linda Siegel is a psychologist.
Okay.
And she's an author of a book, and she's one of the preeminent psychologists in the field of dyslexia. She wrote a book called Not Lazy, Not Stupid.
Okay.
We asked her to review Leah's case. Okay? We asked a number of experts to review Leah's case, and Leah's case was so profoundly egregious that not one of the experts that we use took any payment to actually participate in testifying on Leah's behalf.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So Dr. Siegel, the author of the book Not Lazy, Not Stupid, she looked at Leah's evaluations and she said quite clearly she is dyslexic. Turns out it's not the first time that Dr. Siegel has actually testified against Palm Beach County schools.
Really?
She testified against Palm Beach County schools about 8 years ago in a somewhat similar case. What's unusual about Leah's case is Leah didn't fail. So in every other case that's been brought to the state, the child's been behind 2, 3, sometimes 4 or 6 years behind.
Right.
Leah was not behind. Leah was just barely hanging on. And the challenge was that the district felt that she wasn't failing well enough for them to really care about her dyslexia.
Wow.
And she was right there at the minimum 25th percentile.
Okay.
But it was clear from the evaluations from the University of Miami and Dr. Siegel's review that if Leah did not have continuous, sustained intervention, that she would fail.
Right.
And we didn't want that to happen. So
Of course not. Okay. So tell me more about, I believe it's Camp Spring Creek?
So Camp Spring Creek. So
Okay.
there's a woman, her name is Susie Vandervorst, and she's an Orton-Gillingham master.
Okay.
And Orton-Gillingham is a methodology, it's not a curriculum. And I think, so there's a little bit of a distinction. So Samuel Orton was really old, and this was at Harvard well before any kind of curriculum companies existed.
Right.
And we didn't have to prove that anything worked in a statistical way. And he came up with another doctor, right, Dr. Gillingham, a methodology to teach children to read who have issues with dyslexia.
Okay.
And that is a structured literacy. It was a phonics-based approach to teach children to read. Okay? But it's a methodology. Then along came some of his students, Barbara Wilson, who was really well known because it's the Wilson reading system. And they were able to create a program, which is a curriculum, which when Dr. Orton and Gillingham came up with their reading process, there were no curriculum, it was a methodology.
Okay.
So it's not patented. the federal regulations require a curriculum, not a methodology.
Okay.
And so part of the distinction and the pushback with the school districts, well, Orton-Gillingham is a methodology, and we have to have a curriculum. But there are multiple curricula, as
Right.
you know, for reading, right? There's Wilson, right? There's Linda Mood Bell.
Right.
There's Reading Rockets. There's a whole bunch
There's a
of
lot,
different
right.
scientifically based approaches to reading. And their methodology was the one that we chose for Leo. Camp Spring Creek was founded by Susie Vandervorst,
Okay.
who was a master Orton-Gillingham instructor. And it's a summer camp, and it's 35 kids who can't read. But they have a lot of fun because they're all really creative, and they like to do a lot of
Right.
adventurous things. And they spend about half of their time reading. And they read with a tutor, and they practice everything from reading to writing to learning cursive. And from my perspective of a parent, the most important thing was they learned self-esteem and self-confidence.
Nice.
Because as the kids get older, right, as you know, right,
Right.
their self-confidence wavers because it gets repeated over and over again to them in their heads that they're stupid and they're dumb and they should know these things and how come you can't read this? And you know, talking to my daughter, both my kids,
Right.
the scariest thing for them is reading aloud in class. Because when the teacher goes around and they have to read aloud in class, all they do is sit there and count to see how far away it is for them to
Right.
read in class. So if you're struggling reading aloud is going to be the most terrifying thing. So they don't learn anything from the other kids reading because all they're doing is spending their time counting down to when it's their
Exactly,
turn
right.
to read. So Camp Spring Creek is a wonderful, wonderful environment. They have some scholarships. Nice thing about Camp Spring Creek is that it's really connected into the dyslexia community too.
Nice. Very, very nice. That's amazing. And just circling back to, you know, when you mentioned the reading out loud in class, in most schools that's frowned upon now, right? But I find it amazing that in many schools, teachers are pushed to create data charts where they're posting the reading data or the test data of students, right? So, you know, when you have your students who struggle with reading, their scores are always low, right?
Yeah.
And they're always seeing this. So again, there you go with your self-esteem, your confidence as a student, and the older you get, you're noticing, I'm always down here. I've never liked that practice because, you know, many students, they're not failing because they want to. You know, especially when you think about our elementary age students, right? These are babies. They're just trying their best. So, yeah, that's interesting you mentioned that. Okay, so moving forward, she finishes second grade,
Right.
transitions to third grade, brand new school, Beacon Cove, yes?
No, we took her out.
Yes, okay.
Oh, well, no. She did start in Beacon Cove.
She started, okay.
She started in Beacon Cove.
Right.
She went to Beacon Cove for one day.
One day.
Yes, because or 2 days. She went to Beacon Cove and you understand, right, so Lighthouse Elementary is K through 2 and Beacon Cove is 3 through 5.
Okay.
So she starts day one and the teacher has no idea that she has a 504 plan, no idea that she's dyslexic,
Amazing.
no idea that we've had multiple meetings about trying to create an IEP with the school district. So there's absolutely no transfer of any of that information that's important that you need to know, and you need to know from day one
Right.
on a kid. The administration didn't really know, and the ESC coordinators and the ESC teacher didn't know that Leah was coming to the school. It was
Wow.
absolutely blind.
Really? Wow. Okay. Well, you know, as I mentioned earlier, communication from the top to the bottom is many times lacking in these schools. So she went there 1 or 2 days.
Right.
You guys pulled her
We
out
pulled her out,
and
and
put her in
it's called Billgrove.
Billgrove.
So Billgrove is a school that's named after Joyce Billgrove. So you have Samuel Orton and Dr. Gillingham, and Joyce Billgrove was one of their students. And she
Right.
founded a couple different schools. She founded Liberty School in Durango, Colorado,
Okay.
and she founded another dyslexia school in Texas.
Okay.
Yeah, there are a few of them around the country. There's in Connecticut, there's Eagle Hill School, and in New York, there was Kildonan School.
Okay.
So there are a number of these schools that use the Orton-Gillingham methodology. The Bill Groff School was started by one of Joyce Bill Groff's disciples, Katie Cachette.
Okay.
And there are about 30 children in the school, ranging from first grade up to 8th grade, and all these kids are struggling readers. What do they have in common? They've changed the curriculum in the Bill Groff School to accommodate how those children learn best. So they have a little bit of freedom of movement.
Okay.
They have project-based learning.
Nice.
So that they're not expected to write everything. Sometimes they're expected to make a video presentation about the book that they read.
Okay.
Sometimes they're expected to make a diorama. Sometimes they're expected to bring in a model or build something.
Nice.
But in addition, they learn to read. And they learn to read with the structured literacy based on the principles of Orton-Gillingham. And they have daily one-on-one tutoring.
That's nice.
Right. And so that is it's a gift that we have this resource in our community.
Right.
And that there is a school like that. Unfortunately, it's a small school, you know, and it takes a lot of resources to teach these kids. But these kids do well. And many of them, by the time they pass through a school like Orton-Gillingham,
Right.
are mainstream for high school. So by the time they're in high school, they have learned the skills that they need to compete academically, and very well academically, because most of them are really bright kids.
Okay.
So they learn those skills to read effectively enough to enter mainstream education.
Nice. Very nice. So my understanding is after she was there for 2 months, you guys got a report of how great she's doing, right?
That's right. That's right.
How did you guys feel about that?
Well, how great she's doing is, so it's how great she's doing as a dyslexic student. But what happened was we were in this process of suing the school district. The school district said, oh, but she's doing great.
Right.
And the answer is, no, she's not doing great. She's doing great as a dyslexic student.
Right.
Which is very different than doing great as a student who's mainstreamed and doesn't have a reading problem.
Right.
And so for us, what we were happy about was that she found a place where she can learn the way her brain needs to access the information, right?
Okay.
So if you think about it, right? If you're given information in a way that you can't process, it's just a bowl of soup. But if you can process that information, if it's handed to you in a way you can process it, you can make something out of that information. But it has to be delivered to you in the best way you receive it.
Right.
Whether it's video or oral communication. Most of these kids with dyslexia, in particular, are really good oral learners.
Right, definitely.
So if you sit there and you explain to them why something is, they can explain it to you back, and they can embellish on it. Right?
Right.
And they can take that and take it 3 steps further. But if you ask them to read the same information, because it's not how they're able to retrieve that information to their brain, it doesn't work.
Okay, nice. Nice. But I'm still happy to hear that because, you know, if you were to think back and let's say if she would have stayed in Beacon Cove, even as a dyslexic student, I'm sure she would not have fared as well. Because right?
If you, so, you know, one of the people that we reached out to early in the process was she's a school psychologist in Dade County, and she drew a graph for us. And she drew a graph, and the graph was a graph of a normal kid reading, and it kind of goes up like that.
Okay.
And then she drew us another graph, and she drew a graph of a kid who's dyslexic. And it starts to go up, and kindergarten is great, first grade's great, and then it levels off, and it doesn't have that same angle of incline, so they don't learn as fast as the other kids. And what I know is if she had stayed there, she would have started failing. And we were told that if we hadn't done what we would have done, by the time she was in 5th grade, she was never going to learn how to read.
Oh, wow. Amazing. Yeah. It's clear that your daughter was finally getting her needs met at this new school, which was not a public school. And then October 2020, she finally got evaluated. Tell me more about that.
So what happened in October 2020 was, as you asked me how she was doing in school, she was doing really great in her growth while she was at the Bill Groff for the first few months.
Okay.
Right. But the Bill Groff School isn't a public school system, so they don't have the same record-keeping requirements. They don't have the same statutory rules that the public school has. Mm-hmm. So they give a narrative report card. They don't give a report card with statistics and numbers and not applicable. And so the school district had no way of interpreting the information that they were receiving from the Bill Groff School. Mm-hmm. Partly, I think, is they didn't want to interpret the information, and partly was they really didn't know how to use the information they were being given. So what we did was we found Jennifer Bigos. Jennifer used to work for Palm Beach County Schools. She had been the ESC director for Broward County Schools and had gone to the University of Florida, and she was in her PhD program in dyslexia.
Okay.
She has a son who's dyslexic, so it's a very passionate thing for her.
Okay.
And we asked Ms. Bigos to review Leah's file, to evaluate Leah, because we needed somebody who understood dyslexia and understood what Palm Beach County Schools wanted. And so in having Ms. Bigos evaluate Leah, we found out that she was indeed dyslexic.
Right.
And not only dyslexic by what we thought, and our psychologists and our teachers at the Bill Groff School, but also by the criteria that they would look at in Palm Beach County Schools.
Okay.
She was able to translate that information into, as she said, I can translate the information into terms, tests, and evaluations that they will understand.
Nice.
And she was a great resource. But she was very particular about what Leah's deficit was, as in a way of somebody who's really up to date on the most current literature in dyslexia and reading disability.
So what really stood out for me in reading the final order with regards to Ms. Bigos is, first off, she was just absolutely honest, and you could tell she was really serious about her work. And I noticed that after she spent time with your daughter, observed your daughter, and I'm going to read this verbatim, she made this statement, and this statement is so impactful. She pointed out that your daughter, scored low in working memory, phonological awareness, and rapid naming. So when a student scores low in those three areas, we call that, in dyslexia research or literature, we call that a triple deficit. And so when a student scores low in all three of those areas, that is extremely concerning, because the evidence that we have from the research on dyslexia is that if you do not immediately act and help that student, that they are not going to be able to learn to read proficiently. That is extremely concerning to see a child with a triple deficit like that. How did this statement impact your journey?
It was interesting, right? I'm not an expert in dyslexia. I'm a dad. And so to have somebody say that to you, smack in your face, that like, this girl is, and when she says proficiently, she's kind.
Right.
What she really meant was, if you guys aren't doing this, she will never learn to read.
Okay.
And so it's not just, if you're a high reader like you and I are, right? Well, proficiently just means you're not reading the same kind of books we are, but you're still reading books. But that's not what she meant. She meant that she will never learn to read. She will never pass the state testing, and she is likely not to be able to get a diploma, a high school diploma. That's what she really meant. Wow. Yeah. So it's somewhat shocking, right?
Right.
Because we all want our kids to be perfect, and then it was really, unfortunately, validation. Our daughter's not perfect. She's perfectly great, and we love her. But I think the biggest thing for me was, remember, we were in the process of suing them.
Right.
So it no longer became really about my daughter when I saw this, because I said, if they're doing this to my kid, right, and I'm a doctor, my wife's a doctor, like, we're pretty bright people, like, we can read, we can understand the testing, we can, I don't know all the educational stuff, but I can speak the language, I understand statistics. If they're doing this to me, what are they doing to everybody else? And then it became not about our daughter. It became about a systemic wrong that we needed to help right. We needed to be on the side of right. In fact, she said that in her testimony, Jennifer Bigos.
Wow.
I had to do this because I had to be on the side of right. And that, to me, was really profound. And when I think about it, it really does make me cry.
Right.
Because it is so wrong what is taking place. Because really what the district is doing by not teaching these kids, they're picking the winners and losers.
Right,
and
definitely.
They shouldn't have the right to do that. We shouldn't empower them to do that. We pay the bill for them to teach, and they need to be servicing what our kids need to do.
I completely agree. This was lots of information, right? And as I thought, we were not going to get done because this is it's tons of information, great information that needs to be shared. First, I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to share your story. I'm going to bring you back again because we're going to finish. Everyone needs to know the rest of this story and what happened. And, as you said, at this point, it's bigger than just you. I mean, you're sitting in this room full of people. You're going through this journey as a doctor, a knowledgeable doctor. And then we have other parents, they just work every day, regular blue-collar jobs, educated or not. They're not going to know the intricacies of this system. And they're going to put their trust that the school district is doing what's right. And in many cases, that's not so. As we close, I just want to encourage all parents of students with disabilities or suspected disabilities to really engage and be active and be present and do this work. I'm also going to say that if you need assistance with the process, whether it's students with disabilities, bullying, or anything, please feel free to reach out to me at taratalks.podcast@gmail.com. I am here for you and willing to help you. Lastly, if you liked this episode, if you think you like or love my podcast, please subscribe and try to share with at least one person. Thank you for joining me today, and I can't wait to talk again. Thank you.